Welcome back to a special episode of the Sales Game Changers podcast in partnership with Federal News Network. My co-host is Jeffrey Walensky, Sales Director for WTOP News and Federal News Network. Our guests today are Christine Barger, General Manager for Microsoft, Allison Patrick, Senior VP of Sales for Maximus, Joe Marquardt, Area Vice President for Salesforce, Tamara Greenspan, Vice President for Oracle. We talked throughout today's special episode of the Sales Game Changers podcast about relationships. And Tamara and I, when we did our Sales Game Changers podcast, you've been doing kind of the same thing for almost 3 decades now, which you have alluded to. And you mentioned on the podcast that you've grown up with some of your customers, same way you've grown in your career at various levels and have achieved the highest levels of sales. You've also seen your customers grow. Well, we also talked before about the shrinking nature and the fact that a lot of government employees are retiring and how that's impacting the federal workforce. Talk about developing relationships today in that type of a marketplace and some of the factors and some of the things that you're doing to ensure that the relationships are as strong as possible to help you achieve your goals. Tamara, let's start with you.
So thank you. So one of the things I wanted to talk about that's been exciting, I think, from the federal government is there's been a focus on talent management and succession planning that I've never seen before. So it's exciting that the government is starting to focus on that because you're correct. As people get older, not us on the panel though, we're not getting older, but as people get older and they look to retirement, if they haven't done that, the succession planning and have a plan, some of the major initiatives you worry about because these initiatives in the government can take a long time, from procurement to full deployment to to refresh, technical refresh, they go on for a long time. So that is a worry. So as you mentioned, I have grown up. One example I gave you was I was early in my sales management career. I had a technical director. He was mad. He threw us out of the office, and now he's in SES leading a major organization with the defense agency at DLA. But it's interesting because at that level, they also move around. So you need to also stay, in touch with them. They may move to another executive position within the organization. Even they're crossing more DoD and civilian than I've ever seen before in the last 5 to 7 years. But they usually will end up in a place to provide value and also help you guide your career. And a lot of these folks have been some of my mentors as I've walked through walked through my career and their careers as well. So my advice is to always keep in touch with them and to follow their careers because they're probably going to be in a place that can help you or your colleagues in a different area.
Joe, you've worked for numerous places. Christine and Tamara have worked for the most part at the same places. You've gone from some great brands along the way as well. So how have you been proactive in managing these relationships, and especially now where we're talking about some of the evolution of relationships?
Well, one of the things that I try to impress upon my sales teams is that, we need to focus on the executives in the organization, and a lot of us have had relationships with these executives for a while. But it's really the next generation of leaders where I really try to cultivate relationships with, 2 or 3 layers down in the organization, because first of all, these people inform the senior leadership, and they will be moving into leadership positions eventually. And I've seen through my career folks, to Tamara's point, that have kind of gone up the leadership ranks. But if you start with those folks when they're earlier in their careers, you help them with their careers, you educate them, you provide value to them, folks are going to stick with folks that provide value to them. They're going to stick with folks that help them to achieve success in their careers. So, I started in 1984. Many of the folks that I originally sold to, many of them passed away. I was 24 years old. They were senior folks, and I've seen 2 generations of leadership come up through this business. And what really impresses me is each generation is more savvy, they're more tech savvy, they're better building requirement. It's just amazing to see the talent that is coming in to our customers' workplaces.
It's interesting what you're talking about, Joe, because earlier in the panel you talked about be where your customer is. And I think for some of the companies on the panel, it's easy for the customer to understand what you do. I want to bring this to Allison. is oftentimes you hear about government customers giving you a 30-minute window for that in-person meeting. So you set an in-person meeting at their office, maybe it's at the Pentagon, maybe it's at NIH, what have you, and you have 30 minutes. What is your expectation of what you or your business development team is doing in those 30 minutes? Do you have a specific set of outcomes you want to achieve during that time?
Absolutely. So just, basic sales training is think about ahead of time when you're designing those 30 minutes, how would you measure success? What are the criteria that you would use when you walk out of that engagement to say that was either successful or we didn't hit the mark? And then my number two sort of guiding principle is listen, right? Within the first couple minutes, they should know who you are and what the objective of the engagement is, and then be quiet. And the federal government really isn't interested in you coming in and pitching. That's not the nature of the sale or the engagement. It's really about learning. And so, ask some leading questions about, what's keeping them up at night, what are their challenges, what are they concerned about, what's their vision, and then normally you'll go way past 30 minutes. Yeah.
Christine, for Microsoft, there's so many products and so many competitors. Do you have a vision of what that 30 minutes might look like for somebody from Microsoft that gets a new appointment with a target account that you're looking to do business with?
Yeah, absolutely. We've focused a significant amount of time since I've been enrolled the last 3 years on retooling the way my sellers are interacting with customers. Everything from preparation and the plethora of tools that we now use in order to prepare, driving the rigor around preparation calls amongst the team that's going to go into the appointment to make sure your message is aligned with mine. We know what questions we're asking, we're agreed upon on the outcome of what we want to get out of the meeting, and then that we're providing value to the customer in some way, shape, or form. And we're coming to them with potential ideas and solutions, either from other customers that they may need to consider, what other people are doing, from a peer group perspective, and come to them with some relevant information. And like you said, if you come with value, your meeting will always last longer than 30 minutes.
I want to add to that. One of our cyber contributors, Sean Kelly, worked at VA as a deputy CISO. He talks about Salesforce's first interaction with VA. When you think about the 330,000 people that work with VA, there's probably not just one person that says, yeah, let's spend $10 million with Salesforce. There's a lot of influencers to these sales. How does your team, Joe, manage the different influencers, not only in the sale, but in the entire procurement process?
Well, I think, especially in these large agencies that we work in, it's not like you're going to one person. There are thousands of influencers across a multitude of opportunities. I mean, these are large organizations. I mean, the VA has 174 hospitals. So I think the key is there's this, I think, myth out there that there's some big difference between selling to large commercial accounts and selling to the government. Both organizations, when you're going in to do some sort of enterprise transformational sale, you're going to deal with a lot of people. And the key is to make sure that you understand what the requirements, what the hot buttons are for whatever that influencer. A technical buyer is going to have a different set of concerns than the economic buyer is going to have. He's going to have a different set of concerns than the person that's dealing with security. So each of these teams are the folks that are dealing with implementation. So you have to align and understand what are the folks' requirements in each of the many different influencers, and then it's a question of how do you pull it all together and get everybody aligned. And that's really a challenge for enterprise selling, is that very point.
I want to talk a little bit differently. You've given us some great advice about some things that you've learned over the years. Because of the changing nature of some of the workforces on your teams, I'm curious about some of the things that you have learned from your sales team. I want to start with Allison. You gave us a great story on your Sales Game Changers podcast, excuse me, about how about one of your younger sales team members drew out a picture, which basically helped you explain to your customer. So again, I'd like to learn, what are you learning from the people who are coming up the ranks on your team?
Yeah, so what I have learned in terms of managing a team, we talk a lot about diversity. And I think the maturation of how we use that word, for me, that means, sure, there's diversity in genders and there's diversity in races, but looking at diversity in everybody's backgrounds and age demographics and, sure, gender and race, but orientations, geographic locations. And for me anyway, I make sure that whenever we have a challenge or we're designing a solution, I bring a real diversity of thought around that challenge or issue. And that bears out some really fun, innovative, I think, changing dynamics. And you do arrive at a more sophisticated solution. So in that example, I just made sure I had a couple new college grads, and we were churning and grinding away on this really complex engineering diagram. And there was, I'll say this with all due respect, a kid, Ivy League educated kid sitting next to me, and he had an icon drawn on a piece of paper. It was one symbol, and he pushed it over to me and he said, Mrs. Patrick, isn't that it? And I went, right. That's it. In one symbol, we communicated very clearly the complexity of what we were trying to do, because it was just that simple.
Christine, how about you?
Yeah, it's been interesting for me because one of the things that we've done inside of my organization, specifically to federal, is we've implemented a reverse mentoring program for some of our most senior leaders. So people that have been in the workforce for a significant amount of time, we take in new to career hires every year. We take in 10 to 12, and as much as they want the mentoring of the senior leadership team, we reach out to them to get mentoring back, and it's just simply amazing. Just to kind of get you grounded in the language, the messages that you send, how they want to consume different information and data in different ways. And it's been eye-opening for me and helped me grow in tremendous ways to make sure that I'm connected with them. So let's take that a step further. Those millennials are now going into our customers because I think the statistic is like 60 or 65% of the workforce in the federal government is going to be retiring in the next 5 years. So now all of the great things that we learned inside of Microsoft, we're trying to transcend them into different organizations within the government and providing reverse mentoring experiences for them to give the government new ideas on how to attract talent. And that's been really, really successful for us.
Joe, how about you? What's going on at Salesforce in that regard?
Well, I can say that on my team, I've got a much younger team working for me. I'll be hitting 60 in a year and a half, so I've been in this business for a long time. I learned from the thing that amazes me about the folks on my team, the younger folks, is how savvy they are with technology. And I think I'm pretty good with technology. I've been in technology my entire career. But the kind of tools they come up with, hey, I found this out on the internet, where'd you come up with that? Oh, I was out. It's just really interesting to see that they've been raised with iPhones and social media, and they're so comfortable with it. And I've learned a lot from them about how to better connect with my customer by watching the tools that they're using. And I've learned a lot from my team about engagement in the 21st century, because that's what they do. That's who they are, and it's fantastic to watch that.
So we're coming soon to the end of this, and I'd be remiss to say we've talked so much about the customer in this case referring to the government, but as sales leaders, or just leaders in general, we have two customers, the people that work on our teams and the clients that we serve. I want to conclude with talking about how you keep the best talent on your teams and best practices as it relates to engaging with the people that work for you and making sure that they feel support both from you, but they also see opportunity for advancement and and things that they're interested in having as part of their career. Tamara, can we start with Oracle?
That's a great question. So at Oracle, we spend a lot of time investing in our people with a training plan. Over the years, it was back in the early 90s, it was pretty loosey-goosey, and now it's very structured. We have a very structured training plan, and we have an ongoing training plan. And I think it's important, people think training, oh, it's gonna be a waste of my time, but when you actually go into this training, and we do it quite often, you actually get something out of it every time. I personally am a big fan. I get some nugget out of a leadership training plan or a complex training plan or some of the other people in the room, because usually they're in classroom styles. You always get something out of it. And I think if you take the time, invest in your people, listen to your people. So when you're in these venues, you have people in a room for 2 days, listen to what everyone has to say, and it's a purpose, right? Everything's for purpose. If they say something or people want to learn something, actually take action on that. So what I've learned is do it and take action and move on.
You make a great point on the listen, and that came up multiple times in the panel. I want to go to Christine. You have 100 people on your team, I believe. Listening to 100 people, A, is hard, but B, just because you listen to them doesn't mean that what they say is actually practical in a Microsoft world. How do you take that listening and make sure that people are heard, but it doesn't mean that you have to do what they say?
Right. That's the masterful coaching piece when you're talking to people and how to maneuver through what's important to them and what's the impact to them. Typically, when people make suggestions, after you kind of peel back and go through, we have a coaching methodology that we use at Microsoft, which is super effective. We call it the crayon method. Once you kind of use that crayon method, the initial suggestion that people typically make on the other end comes out to be something completely different. And you're able to kind of coach them along in the meantime. I would just conclude with saying that we're trying to build a thank you culture. In my organization, it's all about thank you. We try to make sure that we appreciate and extend appreciation on the smallest things all the time, not in a disingenuous way, but in a way that makes people feel valued and they want to contribute to the success of the organization.
Very good. So I want to thank our guests today, and I want to thank my co-host Jeffrey Walensky with WTOP News and Fed News Network. Again, our guests were Christine Barger, General Manager at Microsoft, Allison Patrick, Senior VP of Sales for Maximus, Joe Markward, Area Vice President of Sales for Salesforce, Tamara Greenspan, Vice President for Oracle. Again, I'm your host. My name is Fred Diamond. You're listening to a special episode of the Sales Game Changers podcast in partnership with Federal News Network. For more information on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search excellence. We'll be transcribing today's complete episode. It can be found at www.salesgamechangerspodcast.com/federal. To subscribe to the Sales Game Changers podcast, go to the Apple Podcast Store, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Now go out there and go sell.